There are moments in life when the pain becomes too loud to ignore. It crawls into your thoughts, steals your peace, and turns every silence into a battlefield. But what if this pain is not meant to destroy you, but to awaken you? On the 23 October, something within you begins to shift, not because the world suddenly grows kinder, but because you begin to see clearly. Awareness is the beginning of all endings. Pain loses its grip the moment you finally see it for what it truly is. A message, not a punishment. For too long, you may have tried to outrun it. You distract yourself, keep busy, bury the ache under smiles and plans. Yet no matter how far you go, it finds you. Because the truth is, what you refuse to face will always follow you. 23 October is not about waiting for miracles to happen. It is about choosing to see the truth in front of you. It is about facing the ache with open eyes and saying, I understand why you came. That is the day something painful begins to end, because what you accept can no longer control you. Awareness is painful at first. It is the sharp light that exposes the wounds you pretended weren't there. But the same light that hurts your eyes also shows you the way out. You begin to realize that the pain was never permanent. It was only prolonged by your blindness to it. You kept holding on to stories that should have ended long ago. You kept feeding memories that drained your strength. You carried burdens that were never meant to be yours. But now, on the 23rd October, a crack opens in the wall you built, and through it, light begins to enter. You start to see how much of your suffering came not from the event itself, but from your attachment to it. The mind has a way of making pain seem endless. It replays the past again and again until you start believing that the past is still happening. Awareness breaks this illusion. When you become aware, you step out of the loop. You no longer relive the wound. You observe it. You no longer drown in it. You study it. And from that moment, the pain begins to lose its power. That is what 23 October represents, the day the loop breaks, the day you see yourself not as a victim of pain, but as a witness of it. When awareness enters, you begin to separate what is real from what is repeated. You realize that most pain exists in thought, not in reality. Reality is the moment now, and right now nothing is attacking you. The world is quiet. You are breathing. The pain was in the memory, and awareness releases you from that memory. On the 23rd of October, you are not healed by time, you are healed by presence. Because the mind that lives in awareness cannot live in fear. Growth happens in silence in moments when you choose not to escape anymore. Awareness is not about analyzing the pain, it is about being honest enough to see it. It's when you stop pretending to be okay and finally face yourself without defense. That moment is uncomfortable, but that discomfort is sacred. It is the crack where transformation begins. The pain you feared becomes the teacher you needed. It shows you what you ignored, what you suppressed, and what you must release. You start to notice small shifts. You breathe deeper. You speak slower. Your eyes soften. It's not weakness, it's awakening. You are no longer reacting, you are observing. You no longer fight with life, you start to understand it. On the 23rd October, something painful ends. Not because life becomes easier, but because you become more conscious. Pain cannot survive where awareness lives. Awareness teaches you that healing is not found in waiting for the storm to end. It is found in learning to see through the rain. It is understanding that every emotion, every tear, every scar has carried a message for you. A message that says, wake up. You begin to realize that the pain was a guide leading you back to yourself. The end of pain is not outside you. It is born from the moment you see the lesson within it. So on the 23rd October, allow awareness to rise like dawn inside you. Do not run. Do not resist. Let yourself feel everything that comes. See the thoughts for what they are, just movements of the mind. See the memories for what they are, fragments of what once was. And in that stillness, you will feel a quiet freedom growing. And the more aware you become, the lighter you feel. The more you see clearly, the less you need to fight. Awareness is not an instant cure. it is the beginning of clarity. And clarity is the end of confusion, the end of self-created pain. On 23 October, something ends, maybe a memory, maybe a pattern, maybe a version of you that was built on fear. But what truly ends is blindness. The awareness that rises in you is the hand of peace touching your heart. It says, you have carried this long enough. And with that, the weight begins to fall. That is the meaning of 23 October, not a date on the calendar, but a turning point of the soul. The moment when you finally see the truth and stop fighting it. The moment when the pain that once controlled you becomes silent. The moment when awareness enters, and with it, peace. There comes a moment when holding on becomes heavier than letting go. When the pain you've been carrying begins to whisper that it's time to release. 23 October is not just a date. It's that inner moment when you finally stop fighting to keep what is already trying to leave. Detachment is not loss, it is liberation. It is the realization that what no longer serves your growth has no right to live inside your mind any longer. You've carried people, memories, and emotions that have already finished their purpose, yet you held on because letting go felt like losing a part of yourself. But on the 23rd October, that illusion breaks. You begin to see that pain only stays because you keep feeding it. Every thought, every replay of the past, every emotional return to what hurt you gives the pain strength to live again. The more you feed it, the more it grows. The moment you stop giving it attention, it begins to fade. That is the power of detachment. It's not coldness, it's awareness of what is draining your energy. It's understanding that some chapters end not because you failed, but because they've completed their teaching. 23rd October becomes the point where you silently say, enough. This no longer belongs to me. To detach is not to erase memories or deny feelings. It is to stop identifying with them. You are not the heartbreak, the betrayal, or the disappointment. You are the one who experienced them. Once you see that difference, freedom begins. On the 23 October, life pushes you to see what you've been clinging to out of fear. The comfort of pain, the illusion of control, the attachment to something that has already served its time. Detachment is not rejection of life. It is the art of trusting that what leaves creates space for what is meant. You may feel an emptiness at first. The silence after detachment feels strange, almost lonely. But that silence is sacred. It is the space where peace begins to grow. You start to understand that real strength is not in holding on. It is in having the courage to release what no longer nourishes your soul. On the 23rd of October, something painful ends because you choose not to hold it anymore. The universe does not take it from you. You place it down yourself. Everything in life moves in cycles. When you resist that movement, you suffer. You can't bloom if you keep clinging to the roots of yesterday. Detachment teaches you to respect the rhythm of change. People change, paths shift, emotions dissolve, and that is the natural order of growth. The refusal to accept that truth is what traps you in pain. But the moment you allow yourself to flow with life's rhythm, the chains begin to break. 23 October is that flow beginning again, the current of life moving through you freely after years of resistance. You learn that nothing external defines your peace. No relationship, no situation, no memory should have the power to disturb your inner balance. Detachment is the return of your own energy back to yourself. It is when you no longer wait for apologies, no longer search for closure, no longer replay what should be silent. You understand that you do not need to fix everything, you only need to free yourself from it. On the 23rd October, this truth rises within you like a quiet dawn. When you detach, you don't stop caring, you start caring differently. You care without control, without fear, without dependency. You give without losing yourself in the giving. You love without turning love into pain. You accept that some people and moments were never meant to stay. They were meant to awaken you, not accompany you forever. And once that awakening happens, you thank them silently and let them go. That is the peace of 23rd October, the peace that comes not from gaining something, but from finally being willing to lose what was never yours. The mind will try to pull you back, to make you revisit the old pain, to convince you that letting go means giving up. But you have to remember, attachment is the prison, detachment is the door. You are not giving up, you are walking free. The version of you that existed before this moment was trapped in stories that no longer serve who you are becoming. Now you are learning to live lighter, to breathe easier, to move forward without dragging the weight of yesterday behind you. 23rd October marks the moment you reclaim your energy. You stop waiting for something outside you to heal the ache within. You realize that what you've been seeking has always been inside: the stillness, the clarity, the strength. It was only covered by layers of attachment, fear, and illusion. When you detach, those layers fall away and the real you begins to appear. Clear, calm, and unshaken. Pain loses its identity when you stop identifying with it. Suffering ends when you stop calling it mine. Detachment doesn't destroy emotions, it refines them. It transforms the fire of pain into the light of understanding. It turns endings into awakenings. On the 23rd October, something ends because you finally understand that not everything is meant to be carried. Some things are meant to teach you to stand taller when they leave. So let this date be a reminder that nothing real is ever lost. What is true remains, and what fades was never yours to keep. Let the universe take what it must. Let the heart release what it holds too tightly. Trust that every empty space created by letting go is being filled with something higher, calmer, purer. On the 23rd October, the lesson of detachment becomes real. The pain you once feared becomes your liberation. You finally see that endings are not against you. They are the universe's way of preparing you for peace. You bow to what leaves, bless it, and walk forward lighter than before. The story of suffering ends the moment you stop writing it. And in that stillness, on the 23rd October, a new chapter of freedom quietly begins. There is a quiet turning point in every human life when resistance begins to lose its power. For years, you fight the things you cannot control, trying to shape every outcome, trying to make life bend to your will. Yet, every struggle leaves other scar. 20th at October through October becomes that moment when the truth finally sinks in. Pain ends where acceptance begins. It's not surrender to defeat, it's surrender to reality. Resistance is the chain that keeps the wound open. Acceptance is the key that finally lets it heal. For so long, you may have believed that control was strength. You thought if you held tight enough, you could prevent loss, prevent failure, prevent disappointment. But life cannot be managed that way. Life moves, people change, seasons shift, and everything that once felt stable eventually transforms. When you resist that movement, you create suffering. The event may have passed, but your resistance keeps it alive. 23 October reminds you that freedom begins not when things go your way, but when you stop fighting the way things are. The human mind has a habit of wrestling with what is already finished. It replays arguments that ended years ago, clings to emotions that no longer belong in the present. Resistance feeds this cycle. You tell yourself, it shouldn't have happened, or it shouldn't be like this. But those words fight against truth itself. What happened, happened. What is, is. When you accept this, you don't become weak, you become wise. Acceptance doesn't mean you agree with what happened. It means you stop letting it control your peace. 23rd October is the day you stop struggling with reality and finally decide to stand with it. Acceptance does not erase pain instantly. It softens it. It allows you to breathe again. You begin to notice that the more you stop resisting, the lighter you feel. The energy that was once trapped in fighting begins to move again. You start to heal not because life has changed, but because your relationship with it has. The burden that once felt unbearable begins to dissolve, and what replaces it is quiet understanding. This is the shift that 23 October symbolizes, the day your war with life ends. Resistance is born from fear. The fear that if you accept, you will lose control, that if you let go, you will fall apart. But the truth is, the only reason you feel so tight is because you've been fighting against the inevitable. Life is not something to conquer, it is something to cooperate with. Every moment, even the painful ones, carries a lesson. Acceptance is the doorway to that lesson. Without it, you stay blind to what the pain came to teach you. With it, you begin to see. 23 October is that doorway opening. When you move from resistance to acceptance, something within you changes forever. You stop demanding that life be different and start learning from what it already is. You stop replaying what cannot be undone and start listening to what the moment is trying to reveal. This is where wisdom is born, not in knowledge, but in silence. You understand that suffering is not caused by events, it's caused by your refusal to let them be. And when that refusal ends, peace begins. Acceptance doesn't mean you stop taking action. It means your actions come from clarity, not desperation. You still move, but you move with balance. You still choose, but you choose without fear. 23 October becomes a date of calm strength, the day when the storm inside you finally quiets. You no longer ask, why did this happen? You start saying, it has happened, and I will grow from it. The more you practice acceptance, the deeper your awareness becomes. You start to see how much of life you wasted trying to change what was never yours to control. You start to see that peace was never found in perfection but in presence. On the 23rd of October, the lesson is clear. The end of pain is not found by changing life, but by changing your response to it. You learn to bend like water, soft, flexible, yet powerful enough to shape mountains over time. Resistance is noise. Acceptance is silence. And in that silence, you begin to hear yourself again. You hear the voice that says, I am still here. I have survived. You realize that every painful experience was not punishment but preparation. It was shaping your patience, your humility, your depth. When you stop resisting, you finally see how much strength was born from your suffering. 23 October becomes the moment you stop labeling pain as the enemy and start recognizing it as the teacher. This acceptance leads to a new kind of freedom, one that doesn't depend on circumstances. You no longer need everything to be perfect to feel peace. You no longer need people to understand you to feel whole. You find stillness within yourself, and from that stillness, your life begins to change. The outer world reflects the calm you have built inside. What once triggered anger now invites reflection. What once caused tears now brings gratitude. The transformation is quiet but absolute. On the 23 October, something painful ends because you no longer fight it. The wound stops bleeding when you stop scratching it open. Acceptance closes the loop of suffering. It's the moment when you finally stop running from life and start walking with it. You begin to see that nothing was ever truly against you. It was all guiding you toward understanding, toward peace, toward yourself. The transition from resistance to acceptance is not the end of growth. It is the beginning of real growth. It is when you finally understand that your power was never in controlling outcomes, but in mastering your inner state. When you reach that understanding, you no longer chase peace, you become it. That is the meaning of 23 October. It's not about the end of pain. It's about the beginning of clarity. It's the quiet shift that changes everything without making a sound. It's the day the fight ends, not because you were defeated, but because you finally awakened. There are moments in life when you think the pain will never end, when every breath feels heavy and every memory feels sharp. But time, in its silent wisdom, always moves toward healing. There is a timing beyond your control, a rhythm that you cannot force. 23 October carries that energy, the divine timing of closure. It is the day when what was meant to end finally ends. Not because you asked for it, but because the season of its purpose is over. Every pain, every wound, every confusion that has lived too long within you starts to lose its reason to stay. The truth is, nothing in life happens by accident. Every ending has a reason, even if your heart doesn't understand it yet. The divine works in patterns unseen, weaving lessons through the moments that break you. You were never being punished, you were being prepared. 20 and 3 of October stands as the day when that understanding begins to reveal itself. You begin to see why things had to happen the way they did, why certain doors had to close, and why some people had to leave. What once felt cruel begins to feel necessary. You realize that life never takes without giving something back. When something ends, it makes space for what was waiting to enter. But when you resist the ending, you block the arrival of the new. That's why closure does not come from waiting. It comes from trusting. The universe does not move on your schedule. It moves when the lesson is learned. 23rd of October becomes the moment when you finally stop asking why and begin saying, no, I understand. You begin to trust that endings are not chaos and they are order disguised as loss. Sometimes the delay in healing is not because life has forgotten you, but because life has been waiting for you to grow strong enough to handle peace. Pain is not extended to punish, it is extended to teach. And once the teaching is complete, the pain dissolves naturally. On the 23rd of October, that cycle completes itself. The storm that once seemed endless begins to settle, not through force, but through understanding. You begin to sense a quiet balance, returning, a sense that the chapter you've been trapped in is finally ready to close. The divine timing of closure is not always comfortable. It requires patience when the heart wants control. It requires faith when the mind wants logic. But growth rarely happens in comfort. It happens in surrender. You begin to learn that peace comes when you allow life to unfold instead of forcing it to obey you. You learn to wait without bitterness, to trust without proof, to believe without guarantees. 23 October becomes the moment when this trust becomes real, when your heart finally understands that what is meant for you cannot be delayed forever. Closure does not mean forgetting. It means no longer bleeding from the memory. It is when you can look back without collapsing, when the weight that used to crush you becomes light enough to carry. On the 23 October, the heaviness begins to lift. You start to breathe differently, speak differently, see differently. The same story that once caused pain now brings gratitude. You recognize that it shaped your patience, refined your wisdom, and purified your strength. Every ending was writing a deeper beginning. The divine never closes one door without preparing another. The struggle you faced was not meant to destroy you, but to prepare you for what comes next. 23 October becomes a mark of transformation, the crossing point between old wounds and new wisdom. You start to realize that peace was not waiting at the end of the pain, it was waiting at the end of resistance. The lesson was not in holding on, but in knowing when to release. There is a rhythm to healing. It does not rush for anyone. It unfolds at the precise moment it must. You can't force closure and you can't delay it once it's ready. That is the beauty of 23 October. It arrives exactly when your spirit is prepared to rise again. It comes quietly, without announcement, but you feel it deeply. The mind softens, the heart loosens, and something inside you whispers, it's over now. That whisper is sacred. It is the voice of divine timing fulfilling its promise. You start to see that what ended was never meant to stay. It served its purpose. It awakened something within you that could not have grown otherwise. 23 October becomes a reminder that loss and growth are twins. One breaks you open and the other fills the space left behind. The pain that once felt unbearable becomes your teacher, showing you what you needed to know about trust, about patience, about faith. The divine timing of closure teaches you that nothing in life is wasted. Every mistake, every heartbreak, every silence, all of it has meaning. Even the waiting had meaning. It taught you endurance. It trained your heart to hold peace when peace finally came. And when that peace does come, it doesn't shout. It arrives softly like sunrise after a long night. That sunrise is 23 October, the day you finally see that the darkness was never permanent. There is no need to chase closure anymore. It will come when it is ready. It always does. The pain that has followed you for so long begins to fade because its job is done. It has finished teaching you what you needed to learn. Now it must leave. You no longer chase explanations. You simply bow in gratitude for what has been revealed. On the 20th of October, something painful ends because it has completed its role in your story. It has carved wisdom where there was once confusion and peace where there was once resistance. It is the divine timing of endings, the natural order of renewal. You feel lighter because the lesson has settled into your bones, and you no longer need the pain to remember what it taught you. You simply carry the understanding. And so 23 October becomes more than a date. It becomes a moment of alignment, the point where everything that once broke you begins to bless you, the moment when the divine timing of closure turns endings into beginnings, pain into wisdom, and silence into peace. There comes a moment when the noise inside you begins to quiet and you start to feel something deeper than thoughts, something calmer than emotion. It is not the end of pain that you are feeling. It is the beginning of rebirth. On the 23rd of October, something within you begins to awaken. It is the day when you stop seeing your pain as punishment and start recognizing it as transformation. After all the storms, all the resistance, all the moments of breaking, a new version of you begins to rise, not louder, but wiser. Stillness is not the absence of life. It is the foundation of strength. When you finally stop fighting everything that hurt you, the mind begins to settle and the soul begins to speak. You start to realize that healing doesn't come with noise or drama. It comes in silence, in moments when you sit with yourself and say, I am ready to move forward. 23rd October represents that silence, that deep pause between who you were and who you are becoming. It is the space where rebirth begins. Pain has a strange intelligence. It strips you down, removes the unnecessary, and reveals the truth about who you are. Every struggle was preparing you to see this moment clearly. The end of something painful is not the end of you. It is the beginning of the version you were meant to be. When you stop identifying with your wounds and start understanding their lessons, you transform. 23rd October becomes the line between destruction and rebirth. What breaks you only breaks what was false. What remains is real. Rebirth is not loud. It does not announce itself. It arrives quietly, almost unnoticed, until one day you realize that the weight you once carried is gone. You start breathing differently, thinking differently, seeing differently. The same world that once seemed cruel now feels like a teacher. And you no longer look for meaning outside yourself. You begin to create it from within. That is the power of 23 October. The moment when stillness stops being uncomfortable and becomes your strength. When you enter this stillness, you stop searching for validation. You stop running after people or outcomes. You begin to trust your own energy. Trust becomes your anchor. You learn to listen to your instincts, to honor your boundaries, to protect your peace. You learn that self-trust is not arrogance, it is alignment. It is the deep understanding that you can handle whatever life gives you because you are no longer controlled by fear. 23 October becomes the reminder that stillness is not stagnation, it is preparation. Something new is being born inside you, and that birth requires silence. When you rebuild yourself after pain, you begin to see life with new eyes. You stop blaming and start observing. You stop reacting and start responding. You start valuing the moments that once seemed ordinary. You begin to appreciate simplicity. A breath of fresh air, a quiet morning, a calm heart. Growth is no longer about reaching something outside of you. It becomes about returning to your center. 23rd of October marks that return. A deep inner realization that peace was never missing. You were just too distracted to feel it. The old self, the one that lived in fear, control, and overthinking, cannot survive this stillness. It begins to dissolve naturally. You don't have to force it to disappear. You simply stop feeding it. That's what transformation really is. It's not about becoming something new. It's about shedding everything that isn't you. On 23rd October, you begin to live lighter. The expectations fade. The chaos within starts to settle. You find beauty in the quiet. Stillness is not doing nothing. It is an active choice to stop fighting what you cannot control. It is the wisdom to know when to act and when to allow. It is the strength to hold your peace even when the world pulls at you. Rebirth requires this discipline, the discipline to stay calm when your mind wants to run, to stay grounded when your emotions want to rise. 23 October becomes the test and the transformation. It teaches you that peace is not found by avoiding storms, but by learning to remain still within them. The end of pain always leads to a clear vision. You start to understand what truly matters and what doesn't. You stop chasing illusions. You stop wasting energy on what drains your spirit. You start creating, loving, and living from a place of awareness. The noise of the past begins to fade, and the voice of wisdom begins to rise. 23rd of October stands for that awakening, when stillness no longer feels like emptiness, but feels like home. You begin to see that every ending was only the beginning of your return to yourself. The pain that once blinded you has opened your eyes. The silence that once scared you has become your peace. You are no longer defined by what happened. You are defined by what you have become through it. On the 23 October, that understanding solidifies. It is not a moment of relief, it is a moment of realization. You see that you were never truly broken. You were being shaped. When rebirth happens, the outer world doesn't change immediately, but your inner world does. And that shift changes everything. The same challenges no longer destroy your peace. The same fears no longer hold you back. You have learned the art of stillness, and that art makes you unshakable. You no longer need to chase endings or fear beginnings. You live in balance, aware, calm, strong. 23rd October becomes the symbol of that balance, the moment you stopped surviving and started living. From that stillness, and your new path unfolds naturally. You don't have to push anymore, you simply align. You trust that every step forward will lead where it's meant to. The pain that once defined you now guides others. The lessons that once burned you now light your way. And all of it began the moment you decided to stop running from yourself. 23 October is the day something painful ends, not because you escaped it, but because you outgrew it. It is the day your spirit becomes quiet enough to hear its own truth again. It is the day your rebirth begins, silent, powerful, unshakable. You rise from the ashes of what once broke you, not as who you were, but as who you were always meant to be.